start out just by talking to you about this campaign, how it's been different from others, why you decided to rerun, and things like that.
Well, the campaign is different because of a lot of outside influence for the first time that I have seen. I've served the community the last 4 sessions. I've been very involved in the property tax issues and a number of business and commerce issues. We have a lot of things that are important to us here in Bell County, not just property taxes, but water. We have some water resources that other people want. We have neighbors who are not managing their underground water issues very well. We are. We have an underground water conservation district that I helped create. And business and commerce. I-35 running through the middle of central Texas. It's the corridor that's, when you look at it from an economic perspective, 80% of all NAFTA trade, using that old term, comes through Texas. We are the gateway to Central America and South America. So, and consequently, when it comes across down, it either goes on to Houston through I-45 or I-10, or it comes up I-35 and goes on up to the Midwest and the rest of the United States. Those issues are important to us, and our community is growing. We have a very collaborative community, and when I say by that I mean our school system and our chambers and our elected officials at the county level and the city level and the school levels. We all work together. We talk to each other. We're interested in what's going on from a state perspective because it impacts us here. And I see my responsibilities as a representative of being an ambassador for my community in Austin, which requires a great deal of a sense of responsibility and what have you. And it's all about serving with dignity, integrity, and respect, so that when people think about Bell County and the things that we need, they've got a representative that's there that is on top of the issues, knows what's going on, and knows how to get things done.
Yeah. So when a campaign is as different as it is this year with that outside influence, how does that kind of change the process for you?
Well, it changed the process from the standpoint of I've supported all the conservative issues throughout my tenure in the last 4 sessions, with the exception of the vouchers. Okay. I have been a strong proponent for public education. I have supported our teachers with 13th check and with compression, which brings more state money to our schools and is there for the purpose of trying to reduce the local property tax assessments that people pay. I have to pay them just like everybody else. I think they're high, and so consequently I use my seniority on Ways and Means Committee to work on that issue. My background is financial, pretty much a numbers kind of person, and that's the most appropriate place for me to serve, and I think that the leadership recognizes that because of all the things that I've been able to accomplish since I've been there in regards to the property tax issues.
Sure. Even noticing this time around, there's attack ads against you. I mean, what is that like for you when it's such a contentious vote going on?
Well, I've been in business for a long time. I've been involved in the community a long time. I've watched other campaigns. I've watched I've watched people decide to run for office that had no experience in other offices, no accomplishments in the community. And when you don't have that experience and you don't have those accomplishments in your background, there's only one way that you can try to compete, and that's to tear down whoever is serving. And that method is by attacking. And what you're trying to do is suppress that individual's support and base to try to give you an opportunity to win the election. And that's really what it boils down to.
Right. I want to talk about, obviously, that big issue of the school choice vote and how it's brought the governor, obviously, to Temple to endorse your opponent. Talk to me about your decision on that vote to remove school choice.
Well, I have consistently been opposed to the vouchers. And I'm going to just bring it into perspective on this round,
yes.
Okay? it's all about accountability, transparency, and cost. When we funding another education system in the state, we already fund public education and charter schools are basically part of public education. We fund that. We have a constitutional requirement to do that, okay? So if we add a third contingent in there, that's a cost that we better be well aware of. And so that's why I say accountability, transparency, and cost. So let's do a comparison. Public schools have open enrollment. They don't get to pick and choose who goes into the public school. For example, if they have special needs, if they have some behavioral issues. A lot of folks haven't thought about this, but what about children of illegal immigrants that are here? They have to take them all, okay? So they have open enrollment. Private schools don't. A lot of parents think, well, you know, they use the word choice, but we already have choice. You can send your kid to public school, charter school, private school, or homeschool, okay? Those are choices. What we're talking about, and they're not using this terminology, is funding, tax dollars, okay? That carries, in my opinion, a high responsibility of stewardship, okay? And that is a very important piece. Private schools do not have open enrollment. They can pick and choose. I went back and looked at a little history in Edgewood versus Kirby and looked at Edgewood back in 98 to 2005 or something like that, where they had a trial program. Didn't work. The school system even today is almost on the verge of bankruptcy, okay? So private schools don't have open enrollment. Public schools also have an elected school board. So those who pay taxes in the community get to elect trustees to be on the school board who have the responsibility of implementing policy, okay? Hiring and firing the superintendent and those kinds of things. Private schools don't have an elected school board. So if we're going to give them taxpayer money, if we're going to give them your taxpayer money, then you need to have a say because you're the one paying the bill. Sure. So they need to have an elected school board. And then the third item, and there are others, but three major items, a financial audit. There is no entity that I am aware of as a member of the Ways and Means Committee that gets state dollars that is not required to have some type of accountability on that money. So private schools need to have an annual financial audit, just like public schools. Public schools have an annual financial audit, okay? And then I look at cost. Now we have a surplus right now. And when you have a surplus, everybody finds ways to spend the money. We do it as individuals in our own households, and people complain all the time that if the government has extra money, they should give it back to the taxpayers, okay? I looked at this. We have 5.5 million students in public schools. We have roughly, and nobody can really give us a firm count, but maybe 1 million that are split up between private schools and homeschool. Okay. And I support homeschoolers. I talk to them all the time. And homeschoolers tell me they don't want government intervention, and I have a lot of private school people tell me the same thing. But we have that 1 million. Now, in the bills that the Senate has sent to us and the comments that have been made at the state level have been that vouchers need to be universal. If they're not universal, they're not acceptable. Yeah. Well, look up the definition of universal. It means everybody. So even though there's 500 million as a line item in the budget, if it's universal and we have 1 million that are in private school or homeschool, just do the numbers. I came up and did the numbers, and for that 1 million students, if nobody came out of public schools, nobody, just what's there under a universal plan, 1 year is $3.625 billion. We do things in the state on a biennium. Mm-hmm. Well, on a biennium, just $3.62 billion times 2. Okay, so now we're at $6.75 billion for one biennium. Now, as I mentioned, we have a surplus. What if we don't have a surplus? What if we have a recession? Okay, in my business and in my life, I look at second and third order effects of all the policy decisions we make in Austin. I bring that to tape. I actually read the bills. I actually look at these things, and I think from my educational background and from my experience and everything, if we make this policy decision, how is that going to affect something else down the line? And if we don't have a surplus, where are we going to get the money? Well, I've spent the last 4 sessions working on property tax reform, trying to get reductions, putting more money into public foundation school program. Well, in 2011, the state, when they were short money, they needed $5 billion. Where did they go get it? Got it out of public education. Because public education is about half of the total budget for the state. So it's a big pot of money. It's easy to go to, and if it's an emergency item, the governor can declare that. He can go to the legislative budget board and he can move money out of any pot he wants to into another pot to make it work. And I don't know that anyone has ever seen an entitlement program, which this is what it would become, that ever goes away or is ever reduced in what it offers. So when I put all of those things together and I look at this is not conservative. And so it basically is consistent with how I've felt about it before, but now, because we've had what we've had, to drill down on it. Now I want to point out, when House Bill 1 came up for a vote, the first amendment that was presented was an amendment that was a perfecting amendment, but we put an amendment to the amendment so we could get this out of the way quickly. Yeah. And we voted that 84 to 63 and took vouchers out of the bill. Mm-hmm. The rest of the bill was great. It gave teachers a raise, it funded public education, it did all the things that everybody in public education would like to see. Yeah. But the author of the bill took the bill down, which he has the authority to do. And once you do that, we never had a chance to vote on it. So it's very disingenuous for folks who are out there to say, not only are you against vouchers, you're against public education. That is misrepresentation of the truth. Absolutely, totally. You could call it something else if you wanted to get a little more colorful with your language, okay? But it's a total misrepresentation of the truth. Because if the bill had been left on the floor, we would have passed it. And we would have funded public education, and we would have given the teachers a raise, and we would have done all of those things.
Right.
But we never had that opportunity.
And those things weren't even initially on the special session agenda until that bill
That's exactly.
was
That was the first time we ever had a chance to vote on a bill, period, that had anything to fund for public education. But it always had the vouchers attached to it. And we were successful taking the vouchers off, which is what our objective was. I don't regret that at all. I support our school. I think our schools that we have in Bell County, and I can speak for the areas that I represent, I think our superintendents do a great job. I think our teachers do a great job. I've been in the classrooms. I'm in the classrooms all the time. It's not like I just walked in for the first time. I mean, since I've been elected, I have been in almost every school. I think I've been in every school and almost every classroom. And when redistricting came to be, my first phone call when we voted on redistricting, before it was even approved by the Senate, which I knew it was going to happen, I called the superintendent in Killeen because I didn't represent that area. And within a week, I went through all of the schools that the Killeen ISD has in Harker Heights and Nolanville. Met with principals, met with teachers, and the superintendent took me through the high school, Harker Heights High School. That was my first objective, because I am totally committed to the education process, and here's why. As a business person, I want the best educated people coming out of our schools so that the men and women that I interact with in the community that are part of the Chamber of Commerce, part of the business community, have the best educated and trained kids. So if they want to stay here and live here and work here and raise their families here like their parents did, they can. I mean, we've got a great Temple Community College. We've got University of Mary Hardin Baylor. You've got Baylor just up the road. You've got Killeen, Central Texas, which is upper level. And because we're growing as we are, and we're so close to Austin, so close to Dallas, we have a great quality of life. So let's continue to cultivate that.
Right.
I mean, all of us who are parents that have kids or grandkids, we'd like to see our families close and not 1,000 miles away.
Yeah. Obviously, when this bill was introduced, this most recent one, the money was just going to come from the general fund. So
Come from where?
the general fund,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
So I guess I'm just trying to clarify that you don't believe that would be sufficient, that there's enough money there long term for the vouchers.
No, I don't. Number one, it was a small dollar amount to try to entice people to support it, in my opinion, because when I looked at the numbers and I looked at the terminology, it says universal, and I see that there's 1 million kids out there that aren't in the public school system, and we pass a bill. I tell you what I immediately thought of was back when Nancy Pelosi said we need to pass the bill so we know what's in it. I like to know what's in the bill before we pass it, okay? And that's what I did. And when I looked at it, I said, this is going to be really expensive, and there's no guardrails. There's no accountability. There's no transparency here.
Right.
I said, this is not conservative at all.
Yeah.
And once I came to that decision, that conclusion, it was very easy to vote no.
Sure. Obviously, your opponents are talking a lot about a vote in Bell County where a large percentage of voters in this county voted to support school choice. So what's your...
That's a good question. We have 400,000, a little over 400,000 people in Bell County, okay? We have 200, in 2022 when the propositions were voted on, we had 220,000 registered voters at that time. I'm rounding off the numbers. Yeah. In that Republican primary, which was the only primary that had the proposals, it was not in the general election where everybody could vote on it. It was not in the Democratic primary. It was only in the Republican primary. 30,000 people voted in the primary, but only 20,000 voted on the propositions. So you lost 10,000 voters that voted in the primary just on the propositions. Now, I don't know why, but you did. And so when you look at those numbers, only 9.67% of the people who are registered to vote even voted on that proposition. And yes, it's accurate to say that 89%, but it was 89% of 20,000 people, not 89% of 220,000 people, okay? Those numbers are pretty, interesting to look at from that perspective. So it's very disingenuous to tell people that 89% of the people in Bell County wanted vouchers, and again, because numbers are my background, I go and I look at the numbers. I want verification and I want accuracy, okay? And I just pulled it off the Bell County election results. This right there is black and white. What I like about numbers, they don't lie.
Sure. I'm trying to think if there's anything else on that issue. I mean, what's it like just having this riff with the governor at this point? I mean, I think you've told me before that you've sided with him on every issue up to now.
My favorite book in the Bible is James. I read it periodically just as a refresher. I'm not sure if it's chapter 2 or chapter 3, but it talks about bridling the tongue, okay? I have never said any disparaging words about the governor at all. I've supported him in everything he's wanted, okay? When the governor asked me to vote, and I told him I couldn't, When he asked me to white light, present not voting, I told him I couldn't do that because it's not a responsible thing to do. When he asked me to walk, and when the governor came to Bell County, he asked me to introduce him at Central Texas Christian School. And I agreed to do that out of respect. And when I introduced the governor, I introduced him on behalf of his tenure as a judge and as on the Supreme Court and as the Attorney General. And I never mentioned anything about vouchers at all. And he knew where I was on the position. I mean, there was no question about that at all. I was rather surprised that they even, but again, as I mentioned earlier in the interview, that I'm an ambassador for Bell County. So my job is to represent the county or represent my district in Austin and with other elected officials.
Sure.
So I make it a point to conduct myself in the most professional manner and be prepared on issues that are important. And as far as I'm concerned, the governor and I differ on this particular issue. I have no judgment in regards to the governor's decision about opposing me in this regards. And if I am very fortunate to get reelected, I will go back to Austin and do everything I can to work with the governor to take care of things that are important to Bell County. And that's what I'll do,
Sure.
because that's what you have to do, okay? Politics is not for the faint of heart, and politics can be a little brutal, but I'm there to represent the people in this district. I'm not there for politics. I'm there for policy. And that's what's important to the people that elect me, and that's what's important to the people who have continued to elect me, and I think that's what's important to folks who want to see me continue to serve.
Yeah. I have one last question on the politics side of it, just because I'm genuinely curious on your thoughts. Another thing being used against you is your age. What's that like for you?
Well, you know, I had the fortunate opportunity of being a presidential appointee by Ronald Reagan, and I served in his administration. When I served in his administration, Ronald Reagan was older than I am right now. He had a very strong grasp of the political structure and policy. I learned a lot from him serving in that administration for 2 years. I served actually in the Department of Education, okay? I think your experience, the wisdom you've gained over the years through that experience is very beneficial to the people you represent. I'm healthy. I still do all the things that I've always done for a long time. I amazed myself the other day. I've been retired from the military for 20 years, and I put my flight suit on the other day to swear in a young officer, and it fit. So I still fly. I still have to get a medical certificate every year. So I think the experience that I have and the wisdom I've gained over the years really is important for our community, and I bring that to the table.
Sure. Another issue we were talking about before we started the interview that we know is important to Bell County voters, as they just showed up in droves earlier this week to talk about it, is the border. I'm just wanted to give you a space to kind of talk about your stance there.
Well, I think we need to shut it down, and I have been involved in the first border initiative that we had called Green Thunder, started back in the 80s. That was when we used the National Guard for drug interdiction and border support for law enforcement. Flew a lot of those missions from El Paso down to Brownsville, and was very deeply involved in that with my aviation unit that I commanded. When Governor Perry became governor, he formed Operation Linebacker, and that elevated it even more. I remember in the early 2000s when things started really picking up, when we were conducting some border missions, and it was starting to get it was getting more newsworthy.
Yeah.
We didn't hardly anybody knew what we were doing in the 80s and the 90s. Nobody paid attention. And I remember having a discussion with some of my junior officers and said, gosh, we've been doing this for 15 years or so, and all of a sudden everybody's getting interested. Of course, it was elevating too. And a lot of that had to do because the Texas economy continued to grow. And there's opportunity here for the folks that come through. And as I mentioned earlier, we're the gateway for Central America and South America. And that's one of the reasons we have the impact that we have. And then in 2020, 21, I guess it was, is when Operation Lone Star was, and that's when we now have, I think, over 10,000 National Guard soldiers down there. I've been to the compound at Eagle Pass. I make it a point when I go down to work with DPS and the local law enforcement, I go to the National Guard and visit with the soldiers, being a former veteran soldier, and try to find out what are some of the needs that they have and how they're separated from their families and those types of things, and make it a point. And I'll be going back again. I try to go every year for about a week, and I'll go back next week for a couple of days as well. I've made, obviously with the border symposium we had, I've made relationships down there because I was successful in getting the assistant district attorney for the border protection unit to come up to share that with folks. Because when I go down there, then I can come back and talk to my colleagues, and from the experience I have from being down there and flying missions, working with them directly, and continuing to do that now, I can have conversations with my colleagues when they're looking at putting together policy initiatives to help them maybe fine-tune those policy initiatives. Yeah. And I think that's important. Sure.
And I'm assuming you had work in the 2 bills that were just recently passed on those issues.
Exactly, and co-author on the bills. Right. And those were good bills. And of course, the other problem we have is we're a nation of laws. Our adversaries know that we're a nation of laws, so they counter what we're trying to accomplish by using our own laws to try to negate those laws taking effect. And it's a double-edged sword that we have to fight.
Sure. Is there anything else that you want voters to know about?
Well, I'd like to make sure that I point out that in 2019 we began the compression, and it's a very fancy word to say we've gone from Texas funding public education a long time ago at about 65 cents on the dollar to where it was down to about 35 cents, so we're back up to 50. Compression works. I've been very involved in the compression. In fact, when I've been on some panels, some of my colleagues always defer to me and say, well, let Representative Shine talk about what compression is, okay? Basically what it is it puts money into the foundation school program, more money, which means we should have less money coming from taxpayers at the local school district level. What we have to keep in mind is as we put this money back in, it's not a one-time expense. We got to make sure we got the money to put it in the next time. So we've already talked about the cost for vouchers. We've put $18 billion just this last session into compression for public education to try to bring local property taxes down. So that's new money. That comes from somewhere. And if we have the surplus, that's where it's going to come from. And let's just hope, because if we don't have the surplus, we still got to, because once we do that, we got to continue to do that every biennium. And if we increase compression some more, we got to add more there as well. The 13th check for teachers, giving a COLA to the teachers. All of those things are very important. One other thing I'd like to mention too on the vouchers, and this one is one of the second and third order effects things. And I mentioned that if nobody comes out of public schools, and there's 1 million that's there, here's what the cost is. But what if 1% of the students in public education come out of schools? You're going to need less teachers. And I've already got this from the teacher retirement system, TRS, that if there is a 1% reduction in teachers in the teacher retirement system, the teacher retirement system by actuaries becomes actuarially unsound. That is one of those second, third order effect things. Right. When that happens, that means teachers have to put a higher percentage of their pay into the retirement plan. School districts have to do that. The state has to do that as well. And that, again, is one of those second and third order effects that nobody thought about. And I don't think anyone thought about the fact that if you have a voucher program and it's universal, that children of illegal immigrants would be able to qualify for that too. And then suddenly we create a marquee that encourages people coming across the border to want to cross the border for more than just economic reasons or any other reason. They want to come across the border for education for their kids.
Right.
So when you lump all these things together and you put it all in this basket, it is not a simple black-white issue. There's a lot associated to this. It gets back to having the experience and the wisdom to be able to look at these things and work through those things.
Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much. I
You bet.
appreciate your time.
Yes, ma'am.